In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where manicured lawns stretched as far as the eye could see and white picket fences lined every street, life seemed picture-perfect. The air carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and children played freely, on sidewalks under the watchful eyes of their parents. Among the residents was Margaret Maggie Thompson, a kind-hearted 67-year-old woman who had lived in her cozy home for over 2 decades. Her house wasn't the fanciest on the block. It lacked the elaborate flower beds or expensive stone pathways that some of her neighbors boasted. But it was warm and inviting, just like Maggie herself. Maggie's life hadn't always been easy. After retiring from a long career as a nurse, she found herself facing new challenges. A diagnosis of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, meant that her days of running marathons or even taking long walks were behind her. Now she relied heavily on an oxygen tank to help her breathe comfortably. Despite this, Maggie remained optimistic. She cherished her independence and did everything she could to maintain her quality of life. Her small backyard garden became her sanctuary, a place where she could tend to flowers and vegetables, finding joy in nurturing something beautiful amidst her health struggles. But not everyone in the neighborhood shared Maggie's peaceful outlook on life. Enter Patricia Hensley, a middle-aged woman who had recently joined the Homeowners Association, HOA. To many, Patricia came across as overly enthusiastic about rules and regulations. Some called her Karen behind her back, not because they disliked her personally, but because she seemed obsessed with enforcing every little guideline, no matter how minor, whether it was reminding people to park their cars correctly or sending stern letters about holiday decorations being left up too long. Patricia made sure everyone knew she was watching. At first, Maggie didn't think much of Patricia. She figured the woman was simply trying to make a good impression in her new role within the HOA. But things took a turn when Patricia noticed Maggie's small garden spilling slightly onto the sidewalk. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a few stray vines creeping over the edge. But to Patricia, it was unacceptable. She marched up to Maggie's front door one sunny afternoon, clipboard in hand, and informed her that the encroachment violated HOA guidelines. Maggie listened patiently, explaining that the plants were harmless and posed no real threat to anyone. She offered to trim them back if it would ease Patricia's concerns. But instead of accepting the compromise, Patricia grew more insistent. Over the following weeks, Maggie received multiple notices demanding immediate action. Each letter was more aggressive than the last, filled with phrases like, "Failure to comply will result in further consequences." Maggie tried to stay calm, reminding herself that Patricia probably meant well, even if her methods felt excessive. What Maggie didn't realize was that Patricia saw these interactions as a personal challenge. In her mind, enforcing the rules wasn't just about maintaining order, it was about proving her authority. And Maggie, with her quiet demeanor and polite responses, only fueled Patricia's determination to win. The situation escalated quickly, turning what should have been a simple misunderstanding into something far more serious. The tension between the two women began to ripple through the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered about the feud, some siding, with Maggie and others feeling conflicted about Patricia's approach. Sarah, a young mother who lived next door to Maggie, often stopped by to check on her elderly neighbor. She admired Maggie's resilience and couldn't understand why Patricia was making such a fuss over a few plants. Still, most people kept their distance, unwilling to get caught in the crossfire. As the weeks passed, Maggie found herself growing increasingly anxious. She had always prided herself on being a rule-abiding citizen, someone who contributed positively to her community. But now, she felt like she was under constant scrutiny, her every move judged and criticized. The stress weighed heavily on her, both mentally and physically. Her breathing worsened, forcing her to rely even more on her oxygen tank. Yet despite the mounting pressure, Maggie refused to give in. She believed that standing her ground was important, not just for herself, but for setting an example of fairness and reasonableness. Meanwhile, Patricia continued her campaign against Maggie, convinced that she was doing the right thing. She attended HOA meetings armed with detailed notes and photos, presenting her case with unwavering confidence. Other members of the board listened politely, though many privately wondered if Patricia's actions were truly necessary. Some suggested mediation, hoping to resolve the conflict peacefully, but Patricia dismissed the idea, insisting that rules were rules and exceptions couldn't be made. Little did anyone know. This battle over a garden was just the beginning. What started as a minor disagreement was about to spiral into something far darker and more dangerous. For now, however, life in the neighborhood carried on as usual. Children laughed on playgrounds, dogs barked in backyards, and the sun set each evening in a blaze of orange and pink. Beneath the surface, though, cracks were forming, cracks that would soon threaten to shatter the illusion of peace and harmony forever. And as Maggie sat on her porch one evening, watching the stars twinkle above, she couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was brewing. Unbeknownst to her, Patricia's obsession with control was about to take a sinister turn, one that would put Maggie's very life at risk. As the days turned into weeks, Patricia's fixation on Maggie grew stronger. What had started as a minor disagreement over a garden quickly escalated into something far more troubling. To Patricia, it wasn't just about enforcing HOA rules anymore. It was personal. She viewed Maggie's calm resistance as a direct challenge to her authority, and in Patricia's mind, challenges like this couldn't go unanswered. Her determination to set things right consumed her, blinding her to reason or compassion. One day, while driving past Maggie's house, Patricia noticed something new: a small wooden ramp leading up to Maggie's front door. It wasn't flashy or elaborate, just a simple structure designed to make it easier for Maggie to navigate her steps with her walker. For Maggie, the ramp was a necessity. Her COPD made climbing stairs difficult, and the ramp allowed her to come and go without exhausting herself. But to Patricia, it was another violation of HOA guidelines. In her eyes, the ramp disrupted the uniform appearance of the neighborhood, and she wasn't about to let it slide. Patricia wasted no time. She sent Maggie yet another letter, this one even harsher than the ones before. The tone was cold and accusatory, demanding that the ramp be removed immediately. Maggie read the letter with a sinking feeling in her chest. She had already provided medical documentation proving that the ramp was essential for her health, but Patricia dismissed it outright. HOA regulations are clear, the letter stated. Any modifications to the exterior of homes must be pre-approved by the board. Maggie tried not to let the letter get to her. She reminded herself that Patricia's behavior was unreasonable, and that most of her neighbors understood her situation. Still, the constant pressure was wearing her down. Her breathing felt heavier, and she found herself relying on her oxygen tank more frequently. Nights were restless, filled with worry about what Patricia might do next. Would she take legal action, file fines, or worse? What Maggie didn't know was that Patricia had grown tired of waiting for compliance. In her mind, Maggie's refusal to remove the ramp was nothing short of defiance, and Patricia decided it was time to take matters into her own hands. Late one evening, when the neighborhood was quiet and most people were indoors, Patricia drove to Maggie's house. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement as she parked her car a few houses down, careful not to draw attention. Clutching a flashlight in one hand, she crept onto Maggie's property, her heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and indignation. Her target wasn't the ramp, at least not directly. Instead, Patricia zeroed in on Maggie's portable oxygen concentrator, which sat quietly humming near the side of the house. The machine was connected to an electrical outlet, providing Maggie with the steady flow of oxygen she needed to sleep through the night. Patricia stared at the device for a moment, her mind racing. Disconnecting it wouldn't hurt anyone, she told herself. It would simply send a message, a strong, unmistakable message that rules were not to be ignored. With trembling hands, Patricia unplugged the machine. The soft hum stopped instantly, leaving an eerie silence in its place. Satisfied with her work, she hurried back to her car and drove away, convincing herself that she had done the right thing. After all, Maggie could always call someone to fix it in the morning, couldn't she? It wasn't Patricia's problem anymore. Back inside her home, Maggie had no idea what had just happened. She was already in bed, resting after another exhausting day. Her oxygen mask covered her face, delivering the steady stream of air she depended on to breathe comfortably. Unaware that her lifeline had been severed, she drifted off to sleep, Lolma's unaware of the danger lurking mere feet away. Hours passed, and the stillness of the night enveloped the neighborhood. But inside Maggie's home, trouble was brewing. Without the oxygen concentrator running, the level of oxygen in her system began to drop gradually. At first, she didn't notice anything unusual. Her body was used to working harder to breathe, so the subtle change didn't register as alarming. But as the minutes ticked by, her condition worsened. Her chest tightened, and each breath became shallower than the last. Panic set in as she jolted awake, gasping for air. Frantically, Maggie reached for her emergency backup tank, only to realize it wasn't nearby. In her weakened state, she struggled to move, her limbs heavy and uncooperative. Her vision blurred, and darkness closed in around her. Just as consciousness began to slip away, fate intervened. Sarah, her neighbor, happened to glance out her window and noticed that Maggie's lights were off, an unusual sight since Maggie typically kept them on throughout the night. Concerned, Sarah grabbed her phone and called out to check on her elderly friend. When there was no answer, Sarah decided to investigate further. She hurried across the lawn and knocked on Maggie's door. Receiving no response, she peered through the window and saw Maggie lying motionless on the floor. Her heart raced as she dialed 911, her voice trembling as she explained the situation to the operator. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, rushing inside to assess Maggie's condition. They quickly identified the issue, the disconnected oxygen concentrator, and reconnected it, stabilizing Maggie just in time. As the ambulance sped away with Maggie aboard, Sarah stood frozen in shock. Something about the scene didn't add up. Why would Maggie's oxygen machine suddenly stop working? Determined to find answers, Sarah retraced her steps, examining the area around the house. That's when she spotted it. Faint scuff marks near the outlet where the concentrator had been plugged in. Someone had tampered with it. Sarah's suspicions deepened. She remembered seeing Patricia lurking around the neighborhood earlier that evening, though she hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. With a sense of urgency, Sarah retrieved Maggie's smart doorbell camera footage, hoping it might reveal the truth. As she watched the recording, her blood ran cold. There, in grainy black and white, was Patricia sneaking onto Maggie's property, unplugging the machine and hurrying away. The revelation hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. How could someone do such a thing, and why? Overwhelmed with anger and disbelief, she shared the footage with other neighbors who were equally horrified. The once quiet suburb buzzed with outrage as word spread about Patricia's actions. Some demanded justice, while others expressed fear that such a dangerous precedent had been set. For Maggie, however, the ordeal was far from over. Lying in a hospital bed hooked up to machines that monitored her every breath, she grappled with the reality of what had happened. Her trust in humanity had been shaken, but so had her resolve. If Patricia thought she could intimidate her into submission, she was wrong. This wasn't just about a garden or a ramp anymore, it was about survival. And Maggie wasn't ready to give up without a fight. The days following Maggie's hospitalization were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone involved. News of what had happened spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, leaving residents divided between shock, anger, and disbelief. Sarah, who had discovered the tampered oxygen concentrator and uncovered Patricia's actions on the security footage, became the unofficial spokesperson for the community. She shared the video with other neighbors, holding impromptu meetings in driveways and backyards to discuss what should be done next. The sight of Patricia sneaking onto Maggie's property under the cover of darkness was chilling, and it left no room for doubt about her intentions. For Maggie, recovering in the hospital was both physically and emotionally draining. Her body was weak, struggling to regain strength after the harrowing night when her oxygen supply had been cut off. But the mental toll was even heavier. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the moments when she woke up gasping for air, her lungs burning as if they were collapsing. It wasn't just the fear of dying that haunted her. It was the betrayal. Patricia wasn't some random stranger. She was someone Maggie had once considered part of her community. Someone who lived just down the street and waved hello at neighborhood gatherings. How could someone so familiar turn into someone so cruel? Maggie's doctors kept a close watch on her progress, adjusting her treatment plan to help her recover fully. They warned her that stress could exacerbate her COPD symptoms, urging her to focus on healing rather than dwelling on the events that led her here. But how could she not think about it? This wasn't an accident or a natural disaster. It was deliberate. Someone had intentionally endangered her life, and that knowledge weighed heavily on her heart. Despite their advice, Maggie found herself replaying the scenario over and over again in her mind, searching for answers. What had she done to deserve this? Had she been too trusting? Too kind? While Maggie focused on getting better, the rest of the neighborhood rallied around her. Neighbors brought meals to her bedside, offered words of encouragement, and promised to look out for her when she returned home. Even those who hadn't spoken to Maggie much before now stepped forward, united by a shared sense of outrage over what had happened. Some organized fundraisers to cover her medical expenses, while others took turns visiting her in the hospital to keep her spirits up. For the first time in years, the community felt truly connected, not because of block parties or holiday decorations, but because they had come together to support one of their own during a dark time. Meanwhile, Patricia tried to go about her life as if nothing had happened. At first, she seemed oblivious to the storm brewing around her. She attended HOA meetings with her usual air of authority, making notes and issuing reminders about rules and regulations. But cracks began to show. Whispers followed her wherever she went, and soon people stopped pretending to listen to her lectures. When she knocked on doors to deliver notices about minor infractions, many ignored her outright. Others confronted her directly, demanding explanations for her behavior toward Maggie. Patricia brushed them off, insisting that she was simply doing her job and enforcing the rules. But her excuses rang hollow, especially in light of the evidence against her. As the pressure mounted, Patricia grew increasingly defensive. She refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, doubling down on her belief that she had acted in the best interest of the neighborhood. If people followed the rules, she told anyone who would listen, none of this would have happened. Her stubbornness only fueled the growing resentment toward her. Parents whispered warnings to their children about staying away from her house, and cars slowed down as they passed by her driveway, drivers craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the woman at the center of the scandal. It didn't take long for local authorities to get involved. After reviewing the security footage and hearing testimonies from witnesses, police officers arrived at Patricia's door one afternoon. She answered with a mixture of confusion and indignation, protesting loudly as they placed her under arrest. The charges were serious: endangering life and criminal negligence. As officers led her away in handcuffs, neighbors gathered outside to watch, their faces a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Some clapped quietly, while others simply stared, unable to process the surreal scene unfolding before them. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately, dubbing Patricia the HOA Karen and turning her into a national symbol of unchecked entitlement and abuse of power. Reporters camped out near the neighborhood entrance, interviewing residents and snapping photos of the tidy streets where such a shocking incident had occurred. Headlines blared across newspapers and TV screens, painting Patricia as a villain and Maggie as a victim whose resilience inspired admiration. Social media exploded with memes and hashtags, amplifying the story far beyond the confines of the quiet suburb. Despite the media frenzy, Maggie remained focused on her recovery. She gave only one interview, speaking softly but firmly about the importance of compassion and understanding within communities. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "It's about how we treat each other, especially those who are vulnerable. We're all human beings, and we need to remember that." Her words resonated deeply, not just with her neighbors but with people across the country who followed the story. Many wrote letters of support, sharing their own experiences of dealing with difficult HOA members or feeling marginalized because of disabilities. Maggie's ordeal struck a chord, highlighting broader issues of accessibility, accountability, and the dangers of unchecked power. Advocacy groups reached out to her, offering resources and inviting her to speak at events aimed at raising awareness about seniors' rights and disability accommodations. Back in the neighborhood, the fallout continued. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to address the situation, vowing to implement stricter oversight and transparency measures moving forward. Several members resigned in protest of how Patricia had been allowed to act without consequence for so long. New leadership emerged, promising to prioritize kindness and inclusivity over rigid adherence to rules. A petition circulated among residents calling for permanent changes to prevent similar incidents in the future, including mandatory training for HOA members on conflict resolution and empathy. As for Patricia, her life unraveled quickly. Once admired or at least tolerated for her dedication to keeping the neighborhood pristine, she was now reviled. Friends distanced themselves, and family members struggled to defend her actions. Her mugshot appeared in countless articles, forever associating her name with controversy and cruelty. Legal fees piled up, adding financial strain to her already crumbling reputation. While awaiting trial, she retreated from public view, rarely seen outside her home except for court appearances. Through it all, Maggie remained steadfast. Though the experience had left scars, both visible and invisible, she chose to focus on the positive outcomes. The outpouring of love and support from her neighbors reminded her that humanity still existed, even in the darkest moments. And the changes sparked by her story gave her hope that others in similar situations might find it easier to advocate for themselves. By the time Maggie was discharged from the hospital, the neighborhood looked different, not in its appearance, but in its spirit. People smiled more, greeted each other warmly, and made an effort to check in on those who might need extra care. Flowers bloomed in gardens, children laughed on sidewalks, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. Life moved forward, but the lessons learned lingered, shaping the community into something stronger and more compassionate than before. And though Maggie knew she couldn't erase what had happened, she also knew she had played a role in creating something meaningful from the ashes of her pain. Her story wasn't just about survival, it was about resilience, unity, and the enduring power of hope. The trial of Patricia Hensley became a spectacle that gripped not only the quiet suburban neighborhood, but also the nation. Dubbed the HOA Karen case by media outlets, it drew widespread attention, turning what should have been a local, legal proceeding into a courtroom drama filled with tension, emotion, and lessons about accountability. For Maggie Thompson, the ordeal was far from over. Though she had begun to heal physically, testifying in court meant reliving the terrifying night when her oxygen tank was disconnected, a memory she desperately wanted to leave behind. On the day of the trial, the courthouse buzzed with activity. Reporters set up cameras outside, eager to capture every detail of the proceedings. Inside, the room was packed with spectators, neighbors, advocates for seniors' rights, curious onlookers, and even representatives from advocacy groups who saw this as a pivotal moment for disability awareness. Maggie sat quietly in the front row, flanked by Sarah, her loyal neighbor, and a lawyer provided pro bono by an organization supporting victims of abuse within communities. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a tissue, but her expression remained calm and resolute. Patricia, on the other hand, looked defiant. Dressed in a neatly pressed suit, she entered the courtroom with her head held high, accompanied by her attorney. She glanced around the room, seemingly unfazed by the sea of hostile faces staring back at her. To many observers, her demeanor seemed out of touch with the gravity of the charges against her, endangering life and criminal negligence. The prosecution argued that Patricia's actions were reckless and malicious, while her defense team attempted to paint them as a misguided attempt to enforce rules, albeit one taken too far. As the trial unfolded, prosecutors presented damning evidence. The security footage from Maggie's smart doorbell camera played a central role, showing Patricia sneaking onto her property under the cover of darkness. The grainy black and white video revealed her unplugging the oxygen concentrator, pausing briefly to glance over her shoulder before hurrying away. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the clip ended, leaving no doubt about Patricia's involvement. Prosecutors emphasized how deliberate and calculated her actions appeared, arguing that they demonstrated a blatant disregard for human life. Witness testimonies further solidified the case against Patricia. Sarah took the stand first, recounting how she discovered Maggie unconscious and called for help. Her voice wavered as she described finding her elderly neighbor lying motionless on the floor, struggling to breathe. "It was like something out of a nightmare," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "Maggie could have died because of what happened. Nobody deserves that, not for a garden or a ramp or anything else." Doctors who treated Maggie also testified, explaining the severity of her condition and the risks associated with losing access to her oxygen supply. They highlighted how quickly someone with COPD can deteriorate without proper medical support, underscoring the danger Patricia had placed Maggie in. One doctor likened the act of disconnecting the oxygen concentrator to removing a lifeline, stating bluntly, "This wasn't just enforcing rules, it was playing God." Patricia's defense attorney tried to downplay the seriousness of her actions, framing them as impulsive rather than premeditated. He argued that his client hadn't intended to harm Maggie, but had simply wanted to send a message about following HOA guidelines. "She may have gone about things the wrong way," he admitted during closing arguments, "but let's not lose sight of the fact that she cares about her community. This isn't a story about malice. It's a story about miscommunication." But the jury wasn't convinced. After hours of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict on both counts. As the judge announced the decision, a collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. For Maggie and her supporters, it was a moment of vindication, a reassurance that justice had been served. Patricia, however, showed little reaction. She stared straight ahead, her face pale but composed as the judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison. In addition to incarceration, she was ordered to pay restitution to cover Maggie's medical expenses and attend mandatory anger management counseling upon release. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Maggie and her legal team, asking for statements. Maggie stepped forward hesitantly, gripping Sarah's arm for support. Her voice was soft but steady as she addressed the crowd. "I never wanted any of this to happen," she began, her words carrying weight despite their simplicity. "All I wanted was to live peacefully in my home, surrounded by people who cared about each other. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone. But if my story can help others realize the importance of kindness and understanding, then maybe something good can come from all of this." Her remarks struck a chord, earning applause from those gathered outside. Advocacy groups seized the opportunity to amplify their messages, using Maggie's experience to push for stronger protections for vulnerable individuals. Lawmakers cited the case as an example of why stricter oversight of HOAs and similar organizations was necessary. Within months, several states introduced legislation aimed at preventing abuses of power within such groups, ensuring that disputes would be resolved fairly and without endangering lives. For the neighborhood, the trial marked a turning point. The HOA underwent significant reforms, replacing its leadership with members committed to fostering inclusivity and empathy. Rules were reevaluated, particularly those affecting accessibility and accommodations for seniors and individuals with disabilities. A new policy required board members to undergo training on conflict resolution and sensitivity, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with respect. Patricia's absence loomed large in the community. Her house sat empty, its once pristine lawn now overgrown with weeds. Neighbors avoided walking past it, as if the mere sight reminded them of darker times. Some suggested selling the property and donating the proceeds to charity, though nothing official came of the idea. Instead, the home became a symbol of what happens when authority is wielded without compassion, a cautionary tale etched into the fabric of the neighborhood. As for Maggie, she slowly rebuilt her life. With financial assistance from fundraisers and donations, she installed a permanent compliant ramp leading up to her front door, along with upgraded safety features throughout her home. Her backyard garden flourished once again, bursting with colorful blooms and fresh vegetables. She spent hours tending to it, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing life after so much turmoil. Yet the experience left indelible marks on her. While she was grateful for the support she received, she couldn't shake the feeling that trust was fragile, a lesson reinforced every time she passed Patricia's vacant house. Still, she refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, she channeled her energy into advocacy work, speaking at events and collaborating with organizations dedicated to protecting seniors and individuals with disabilities. Her courage inspired countless others to share their own stories, creating a ripple effect of change that extended far beyond her small suburb. In the end, the trial wasn't just about punishing Patricia. It was about sending a message. It reminded everyone watching, whether in the courtroom or on TV screens across the country, that actions have consequences, that unchecked power can lead to devastating outcomes, and that communities thrive not because of rigid rules, but because of the connections forged between people willing to stand up for one another. As Maggie stood in her garden one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she knew she had faced her darkest hour and emerged stronger. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in the power of resilience, unity, and hope. In the months following Patricia's conviction, life in the neighborhood began to settle into a new rhythm. The once quiet suburb, which had been thrust into the national spotlight, slowly returned to its peaceful routines. But it was a different kind of peace now. The scars left by Patricia's actions remained visible, etched into the memories of those who lived there. Yet amidst the lingering unease, something remarkable emerged, a renewed sense of unity and purpose. Maggie Thompson became an unlikely beacon of hope for her community. Her courage in the face of adversity inspired others to speak up about their own struggles, whether they involved navigating disabilities, dealing with difficult neighbors, or simply feeling overlooked in a world that often prioritized conformity over compassion. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves began reaching out to one another, forming bonds that went beyond polite waves and small talk. It was as if Maggie's ordeal had stripped away the superficial layers of suburban life, revealing the humanity beneath. One of the most noticeable changes was the transformation within the HOA itself. The organization, once dominated by rigid rules and enforcement tactics, underwent a complete overhaul. New leadership took charge, led by Sarah, the same neighbor who had discovered Maggie gasping for air that fateful night. Sarah, along with a group of like-minded residents, implemented policies designed to foster inclusivity and understanding. They established committees to address accessibility concerns, ensuring that individuals with disabilities or health conditions would never again face hostility for making necessary modifications to their homes. Monthly meetings were open to all residents, encouraging open dialogue and collaboration rather than top-down mandates. The changes extended beyond policy updates. Inspired by Maggie's advocacy work, the neighborhood organized events aimed at bringing people together. Community gardens sprouted up in empty lots, offering spaces where residents could grow fruits, vegetables, and flowers side by side. Workshops on topics ranging from conflict resolution to disability awareness drew crowds eager to learn and grow. Even children got involved, participating in art projects and fundraisers to support local charities. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive, not just with manicured lawns and pristine sidewalks, but with genuine connection and shared purpose. For Maggie, these developments brought both joy and healing. She threw herself into her role as an advocate, traveling to nearby towns and cities to share her story. Her message was simple yet powerful. Kindness matters. Whether addressing a room full of strangers or chatting with a neighbor over coffee, she emphasized the importance of empathy and understanding. "We're all human beings," she often said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. No rule, no guideline, no regulation is worth losing sight of that. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Advocacy groups praised her bravery, inviting her to speak at conferences and rallies across the country. Lawmakers cited her case when introducing bills aimed at protecting vulnerable populations from abuse within communities. Magazines featured her on their covers, dubbing her a symbol of resilience and a voice for change. Despite the attention, Maggie remained humble, deflecting praise onto the friends and neighbors who had supported her through everything. "This isn't about me," she insisted. "It's about what we can do together." As time passed, Maggie found solace in the little things, the moments of beauty and grace that reminded her how far she'd come. She spent hours tending to her garden, marveling at the vibrant colors and fragrant blooms that seemed to thrive under her care. On warm evenings, she sat on her porch, watching fireflies dance in the twilight and listening to the distant laughter of children playing outside. These small pleasures grounded her, reminding her that life, even after hardship, could still hold wonder. Yet, not every day was easy. Some nights, Maggie lay awake, haunted by memories of the night her oxygen tank was disconnected. The fear and helplessness she had felt lingered, lurking in the shadows of her mind. But instead of letting those feelings consume her, she channeled them into action. She worked tirelessly to ensure that no one else would experience what she had endured. Through partnerships with advocacy organizations, she helped create resources for seniors and individuals with disabilities, providing guidance on navigating disputes with HOAs and other governing bodies. Her tireless efforts earned her recognition, but more importantly, they made a tangible difference in countless lives. Meanwhile, Patricia Hensley served her sentence quietly, largely forgotten by the public except as a cautionary tale. Upon her release, she struggled to rebuild her life. Friends and family distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose name had become synonymous with cruelty and entitlement. Job prospects were scarce, and finding housing proved equally challenging. Eventually, she moved out of state, disappearing from the headlines and the lives of those she had impacted. While some expressed sympathy for her plight, most agreed that her punishment fit the crime, a stark reminder that actions have consequences. Back in the neighborhood, Patricia's legacy served as a lesson rather than a burden. Her house, long abandoned, was eventually sold to a young family who transformed it into a cheerful home filled with laughter and light. The overgrown lawn gave way to flower beds and a swing set, symbols of renewal and fresh starts. Each time Maggie walked past the property, she felt a twinge of sadness but also a flicker of hope. Life moved forward as it always did, carrying with it the potential for growth and redemption. The final chapter of Maggie's journey came unexpectedly, during a community gathering held in her honor. Residents gathered in the park, sharing food, stories, and laughter under strings of twinkling lights. Children ran barefoot through the grass, while older folks swapped tales of days gone by. At the center of it all stood Maggie, smiling warmly, as Sarah presented her with a plaque commemorating her contributions to the neighborhood. Engraved on it were the words, "For strength, resilience, and inspiring us all to be better." Tears welled in Maggie's eyes as she accepted the gift, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude surrounding her. As she looked out at the faces of her neighbors, people who had once been strangers but now felt like family, she realized that her story wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation, about turning pain into purpose and division into unity, about proving that even in the darkest moments light could shine through. And so as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in a golden glow, Maggie allowed herself to feel at peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone. Together, she and her neighbors had weathered a storm, and in doing so, they had built something stronger, kinder, and more enduring than any rulebook could ever dictate. Theirs was a community forged not by regulations but by hearts united in hope and humanity. And for Maggie, that was enough.